The modern city is designed to crush you the moment your bank account hits zero. But what happens when the ruthless billionaires who steal your life force you into the shadows, completely unaware that they just handed you the very keys to their destruction? When a predatory corporate syndicate erased Elena's architectural firm, drained her accounts, and left her homeless, they expected her to simply disappear. And she did. She descended into a forgotten, pitch-black 1930s subterranean world beneath the city's roaring streets. But what Elena engineered in the dark wasn't just a desperate bid for survival. And what she discovered sealed behind a rusted vault door was a weapon so powerful it would obliterate the empire of the men who laughed at her downfall. If you love watching untouchable elites lose absolutely everything to the very person they underestimated, you need to stay until the very end. You will not believe who Elena invited to her underground sanctuary just months later. Welcome to While You Still Can. If you believe that the best revenge is cold, calculated, and perfectly engineered, hit that subscribe button right now. We share stories of brilliant minds who turn total defeat into absolute victory. Like this video to remind the world that being pushed off the grid is sometimes exactly what you need to rewrite the rules. Let's dive in. The urban financial trap operates as a flawless mathematical equation where the final variable always equals zero. Elena stared at the glowing screen of the automated teller machine, which displayed a balance of exactly $0 and 0 cents. This was not a system error, but the final phase of a calculated corporate liquidation. 6 months prior, her independent architectural firm had become the target of a predatory acquisition. A massive development conglomerate wanted her prime municipal contracts, and rather than negotiating a buyout, they initiated a barrage of fabricated breach of contract lawsuits. Their legal strategy relied on simple attrition. The conglomerate possessed infinite capital, and Elena did not. Retainers for defense attorneys quickly drained her business accounts, while the court system moved with agonizing slowness, consistently favoring the party with deeper pockets. Then came the asset freeze. A preliminary injunction locked her personal savings, pending a trial resolution, causing her credit rating to plummet from 800 to unreadable within 14 days. Because the modern metropolis runs entirely on digital trust, a citizen without a valid credit score simply ceases to exist in the economic ecosystem. The eviction followed a rigid, automated protocol. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, and by Friday afternoon, a municipal bailiff had changed the locks on her downtown apartment. Since grace periods no longer existed under the revised city ordinances, Elena found herself standing on the pavement with only 2 heavy canvas duffel bags. They held 3 changes of clothes, a laptop with a dead battery, and a set of high-grade drafting tools. Her entire previous life, the custom furniture, the curated art, the physical archives of her designs, remained trapped behind a heavy oak door as seized collateral. Poverty in a high-density urban environment acts as a rapid social contagion. Former colleagues stopped answering messages, while industry contacts offered brief, hollow sympathies before permanently severing communication. The city functions on a strict hierarchy of utility, and a bankrupt architect holds none. Experiencing the immediate onset of social invisibility, Elena watched as pedestrians actively averted their gaze, treating her as an obstacle rather than a person. As cold rain began to fall, its drops mixing with the heavy grit of diesel exhaust, the neon signs from the financial district bled into the wet asphalt. Elena analyzed her immediate surroundings through the lens of a spatial designer. Every square inch of the surface world is heavily monetized. Survival above ground requires a continuous, uninterrupted stream of capital. You pay a premium to sit inside a climate-controlled cafe, a daily rate to sleep in a secure bed, and even pay for the right to exist in illuminated public spaces without being charged with loitering. She conducted a mental audit of her remaining liquid assets, which amounted to exactly $42 in physical currency. A low-end motel room on the outskirts of the city would consume that entire amount in a single night. Meanwhile, seeking refuge in a municipal shelter carried a high statistical risk. She would likely lose her drafting tools to theft within hours. Those titanium tools were the last physical proof of her professional competence, and she could not risk them. The mathematical reality was absolute. The surface world offered no viable solution. The system was designed to crush individuals lacking financial leverage, so she needed a structural blind spot. Though the city grid is obsessively monitored by surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and private security patrols across all commercial and residential zones, every complex architectural system generates anomalies. Turning her back on the glowing avenues, Elena walked toward the decaying industrial sector at the edge of the river. Bypassing the zones of active commerce, she sought the infrastructural shadows. The towering glass skyscrapers above represented the very machine that had systematically expelled her. She stopped looking up at the facades and directed her focus downward. Beneath the thick concrete crust lay thousands of miles of forgotten arteries. This subterranean network consisted of maintenance tunnels, storm drains, and decommissioned utility shafts. It was an underground world that demanded no monthly rent and asked for no digital credit check. It only required the psychological willingness to step into absolute darkness. She approached a rusted utility grate hidden behind a row of overflowing industrial dumpsters in a dead-end alley. Its heavy iron bars were partially obscured by overgrown weeds and accumulated urban debris. Gripping the cold metal, Elena knew this was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat. The surface had rejected her, so she prepared to descend into the foundations of the city. When the rusted padlock finally snapped, Elena pushed the heavy iron grate aside, releasing a gust of cold, stale air that carried the scent of dry rot and electrified dust. She aimed her flashlight into the vertical shaft, its beam swallowed by the darkness for about 40 feet, revealing a forgotten layer of the city below. Gripping the cold steel rungs, her descent began. The muffled rumble of street traffic faded with every step, while the temperature dropped sharply, moisture clinging to the brick walls until her boots hit a solid concrete floor. She stood in a narrow utility tunnel. A heavy steel door blocked the path, its hinges fused with rust. Using a titanium pry bar, Elena forced it open. The metal shrieked as the door gave way, allowing her to step through the threshold. The space opened up into a massive cavern. As her flashlight swept across the void, glazed ceramic tiles reflected the beam, revealing geometric Art Deco patterns. This was the abandoned 1930s transit hub that city planners had sealed off over 70 years ago. The absolute heavy silence pressed against her eardrums like a physical weight. Dust particles danced in the singular shaft of light, illuminating a vintage brass turnstile standing frozen in time with its wooden arms petrified. As Elena walked toward the main platform, crushed glass crunched under her soles. Faded advertising posters clung to the curved walls, promoting long-forgotten brands of soap and transatlantic steamship voyages in elegant typography, their colors muted by decades of subterranean dampness. The empty trackbed featured rusted rails running parallel into the pitch-black tunnels, from calcium deposits forming small stalactites on the vaulted ceiling. A single drop of water fell. The echo bounced off the tile walls, sounding like a gunshot in the absolute quiet. With no wind and no natural light, the isolation was immediate and total. Elena switched off her flashlight for 3 seconds, and the darkness settled over her like a physical weight, erasing all sense of scale and direction until she quickly flicked the light back on. In the center sat an old ticket booth with its reinforced glass intact, and a brass speaker grill, tarnished green with oxidation. Inside, an upright wooden stool faced a ledger lying open on the counter, its pages long turned to gray ash. This was not just a ruin, but a perfectly preserved hermetic seal. The massive concrete pillars showed no structural stress, and the vaulted arches flawlessly distributed the weight of the skyscrapers above. Running her gloved hand over the cold ceramic wall, Elena knew she had found her sanctuary. The chaotic world above ceased to exist, replaced by a space where time had stopped in 1939. Moving past the ticket booth, she observed the platform stretching for 300 feet. Ornate cast-iron benches, their green paint peeling in large flakes, lined the center beneath spherical glass light fixtures coated in a thick film of black soot. Elena carefully inspected the structural integrity, noting that the engineers of the era had built things to endure. The riveted steel girders supporting the ceiling showed minimal corrosion, as the lack of oxygen and steady humidity had preserved the ironwork in a masterclass of civil engineering. Walking to the edge of the platform, she noticed a yellow safety line embedded in the terrazzo floor. The mosaic tiles spelled out the station's name in sharp, angular letters, which she thoughtfully traced with her boot. A side corridor leading away from the main tracks caught her attention. Following the narrow passage where the air felt slightly cooler, she emerged into a staff break room featuring a wall of metal lockers and a rusted coffee percolator sitting on a wooden table. Here, the sensory experience shifted. The smell of ozone faded, replaced by the distinct odor of old paper and machine oil. When Elena opened one of the lockers, the light caught a brass badge pinned to the front of a wool conductor's cap resting on the top shelf. This subterranean environment demanded respect. With every sound magnified, her own breathing seemed unnaturally loud, forcing her into a state of hyper-awareness, devoid of visual distractions or shifting shadows, just the steady beam of her light. Analyzing the ventilation, she felt faint air currents moving near the ceiling grates, indicating a connection to the active subway lines miles away. This detail was crucial for her survival. The air was stale, but it was breathable. Elena sat on one of the cast-iron benches and turned off the flashlight again to let her eyes adjust. They didn't. Total darkness offers no adjustment, so she focused instead on her hearing, picking up the distant, rhythmic vibration of the city above that felt like a faint heartbeat through the concrete. Sitting 50 feet below the pavement where millions of people walked without knowing this cavern existed, she felt a profound psychological disconnect. She was now completely removed from the social grid. Switching the light back on, the beam illuminated a utility door at the far end of the platform, reinforced with heavy steel bands and a brass plaque reading, "Authorized personnel only." This marked the next phase. The vast station offered multiple layers of concealment. As she stood up, the echo of her movement rolling down the tunnel, the initial shock of the descent faded into cold calculation. This space was highly defensible, structurally sound, and served as the perfect blank canvas. With the 1930s architecture providing a solid foundation, Elena now needed to engineer a system for autonomous survival. Living off the grid usually implies a cabin in a remote forest, but Elena chose a concrete tomb 60 feet below the pavement. While the abandoned 1930s transit station offered absolute isolation, it also offered zero utilities. No running water, stagnant air, and electrical cables that had been stripped for copper decades ago. The challenge shifted immediately from mere hiding to complex subterranean engineering, as she had to build a self-sustaining ecosystem in the dark. Because thirst kills much faster than the cold, Elena first addressed the tunnel's moisture, which was highly toxic after decades of iron dust. Aerosolized brake fluid and urban runoff had coated the ceramic walls. Studying the ceiling arches, she noted that condensation gathered there, naturally due to the temperature differential between the sun-baked street level and the deep earth. To harness this, she rigged a massive catchment system using discarded heavy-duty construction plastic, stringing the thick tarps tight across the highest vault ribs. Angled slightly downward, this geometry directed heavy droplets into a central suspended funnel. Since raw tunnel sweat remains undrinkable, Elena built a gravity-fed filtration tower, utilizing 3 stacked 5-gallon buckets. The top bucket held coarse gravel scavenged from the abandoned trackbed to catch large rust flakes and debris, while the middle layer contained crushed charcoal that she manufactured herself by burning dry construction timber in a sealed metal tin. The bottom layer utilized tightly packed sheets of discarded cotton clothing. The slow, methodical drip yielded surprisingly clear water, though she still boiled every single drop using a small camping stove with strictly rationed butane fuel. Absolute darkness in a sealed tunnel can cause severe sensory deprivation within days, and since open fire consumes precious oxygen while producing deadly carbon monoxide, Elena needed clean, silent electricity. She established a strict rotation of high-capacity portable power banks, sourcing these units from electronics recycling bins behind corporate office buildings. Though many were discarded due to minor casing damage, their internal lithium cores remained perfectly viable. Carrying 6 heavy units at a time in a reinforced backpack, she emerged into the loud city above every 3 days to visit public libraries, hospital waiting rooms, and 24-hour diners. There, she discreetly plugged her arrays into hidden wall outlets, downloading offline engineering manuals, while the lithium cells absorbed the grid's power. Back underground, these power banks became the heart of her station. Wiring the batteries to high-efficiency LED strips, she modified the circuits to run on minimal voltage and illuminated only her immediate workspace. This strategy preserved her power and kept her visual footprint entirely hidden from the main transit lines miles away. While subterranean spaces maintain a constant baseline temperature, human habitation rapidly alters the local microclimate through body heat, cooking flames, and running electronics that generate significant thermal buildup. Without active ventilation, the stagnant air turns oppressive as humidity quickly reaches 100%, turning black mold into a critical, fast-acting threat to the respiratory system. To combat this, Elena engineered a passive climate control network utilizing the natural draft of the adjacent service tunnels. Because active trains passing on modern lines 2 miles away pushed massive columns of air through the subterranean network, she mapped these invisible pressure waves using a simple lighter flame and hung damp canvas sheets across the narrowest access corridors. When the distant trains pushed dry air through the tunnels, it hit the wet canvas and evaporated instantly. This physical phase change absorbed latent heat from the surrounding air, dropping the ambient temperature in her living quarters by 10 degrees, while creating a continuous, artificial microbreeze. The stale, humid air was constantly pushed upward and out through the upper ventilation shafts, though the canvas sails required re-wetting every 4 hours. Survival transformed into an exact, unforgiving science where every calorie expended required careful calculation. Elena measured the daily water yield down to the fluid ounce, logged the battery drain down to the milliampere, and patched the canvas cooling sails weekly using heavy nylon thread. The station ceased to be a decaying ruin, becoming instead a highly calibrated living machine with Elena as its sole engineer and operator. As the damp, dark concrete transformed into a functioning, autonomous habitat, the rhythmic dripping of the water filter became a reliable metronome for her new life, and the soft, high-pitched hum of the LED inverter replaced the chaotic noise of the city above. She had completely severed all physical ties with the modern grid, yet she possessed more control and stability now than in her previous life. The engineering was flawless, the isolation was absolute, and the foundation for her next move was finally secure. A hidden sanctuary remains secure only until a foreign light pierces its shadows. Over 4 months, Elena transformed the decayed 1930s platform into a highly functional habitat by treating the city above as a continuous, open-source supply chain. Because the surface economy ran on planned obsolescence and rapid aesthetic shifts, wealthy commercial districts discarded perfectly functional infrastructure daily, prompting her to map the waste disposal schedules of luxury hotels and corporate offices. Transportation required brutal physical endurance and meticulous planning. Working exclusively between 3 and 4 in the morning, she dismantled large architectural elements on the surface and carried them down the vertical maintenance shaft piece by piece. As a result, the visual contrast on the platform became a study in chronological collision. Original Art Deco mosaics crumbled on the damp walls directly above a salvaged mid-century modern credenza. Elena had repaired its shattered hinges with scrap aluminum, repurposing it as her primary dry food storage. To combat the constant, toxic silica dust generated by the cracked concrete floor, she engineered a solution using layered textiles. After dragging 7 discarded Persian rugs from a flooded theater basement and drying them over the active subway ventilation grates, she laid them across the platform. The thick wool completely trapped the dust while simultaneously neutralizing the acoustic echoes of her footsteps, a crucial feature, as silence was her primary defense mechanism. Because lighting dictated the psychological atmosphere of the bunker, the raw, clinical glare of her portable industrial work lamps felt too hostile. Finding a crate of broken stained glass near a cathedral renovation site, she suspended the colored shards around her LED bulbs using stripped copper wire. The harsh white beams fractured into warm amber and deep crimson tones, softening the brutalist geometry of the station. She built a structural divider using discarded wooden shipping pallets, sanding the rough wood by hand before sealing it with leftover polyurethane found in a construction dumpster. This barrier separated her sleeping quarters from the main living area, creating a necessary illusion of domestic normalcy. A velvet armchair with a torn seam, which she stitched back together using braided Kevlar fishing line, became her central observation post. Positioned beside the main load-bearing pillar, this specific angle offered a clear, unobstructed view of the tunnel entrance. To mask the subterranean smell of stagnant water and electrical ozone, she hung bundles of dried cedar over the main air intake vents, allowing the tunnel draft to carry the crisp scent throughout the platform. The space no longer resembled a forgotten municipal tomb. Instead, it looked like an eccentric, curated gallery of urban excess. However, routine inevitably breeds a dangerous sense of security. On a Tuesday night, the intrusion began exactly at 2 in the morning with vibrations that differed from the rhythmic rumble of the active transit lines. It was a slow, irregular, heavy tremor, followed by the deliberate crunch of steel-toed boots against the gravel ballast. Instantly extinguishing the main battery array, Elena let total darkness swallow the platform as she retreated silently behind the wooden pallet divider. A narrow beam of high-intensity yellow light swept across the tunnel walls, belonging to a transit authority trackwalker whose official mandate was inspecting structural integrity and clearing debris. Moving with methodical, practiced precision, he swung a heavy metal wrench against the iron track rivets, sending sharp metallic clangs echoing violently through the cavernous space. After checking the moisture levels on the tunnel ceiling, he paused directly outside her arched entrance. The flashlight beam cut through the floating dust particles to illuminate the fringed edge of the top Persian rug. The worker stopped and stepped onto the platform, his heavy boots leaving damp footprints on the dry wool. As his shoulder radio crackled with loud static and a dispatcher's voice muttered a rapid string of numeric codes, he reached for his microphone, but he did not press the transmission button. Slowly lowering his flashlight, he let the ambient glow from the distant active tunnel reveal the contours of the space. The velvet armchair, the polished credenza, and the intricate stained glass lamp hanging from the vaulted ceiling. He was a man in his late 50s, with deep lines carving his weathered face and a high-visibility orange vest stained with old black grease. Quietly, he scanned the deep shadows behind the wooden divider. Elena held her breath, her right hand gripping the handle of a heavy steel wrench as she calculated the exact distance to the emergency exit shaft and planned her escape route in milliseconds. The worker clearly knew someone was hiding there. The setup was too deliberate, and the thermos on the table was still radiating a faint wisp of steam. He stood completely still for 2 full minutes while the distant roar of a freight train masked the sound of Elena's racing pulse. Walking slowly toward the credenza, the worker looked at her neatly organized hand tools before reaching into his heavy canvas equipment bag. As Elena tensed her muscles for a sprint, he pulled out a thick, wax-wrapped package and placed it gently on the wooden surface. It was a high-capacity industrial battery pack, likely swapped out during a routine maintenance check. Turning around, he walked back to the edge of the platform and stepped down onto the gravel ballast. He never spoke a single word, nor did he ever shine his light directly into her hiding spot. Instead, he pressed the button on his radio and reported Section 4 completely clear of obstructions before the crunch of his boots faded into the dark tunnel. By leaving her sanctuary intact, he became a silent accomplice. While the surface world demanded rigid adherence to property lines and zoning permits, the underground infrastructure operated on its own unwritten laws, recognizing and respecting the raw effort of survival. This silent agreement fundamentally shifted Elena's reality. She was no longer just a fugitive hiding in the dark, but an acknowledged resident of the Shadow City. The heavy battery pack sitting on the table served as tangible proof of her accepted existence. The acoustic signature of the eastern tunnel wall betrayed its secret when Elena tapped the handle of her screwdriver against the damp tiles. While most of the station echoed with a dull, heavy resonance, a specific rectangular section returned a sharp, hollow crack. Pressing her palm against the masonry, she felt the temperature drop significantly right at the seam. Although the concrete blueprint of the station showed solid earth here, the physical reality proved otherwise. Scraping away decades of hardened grime with a steel trowel, Elena uncovered a hairline fracture in the mortar. She chipped away the edges to reveal a heavy steel plate. This was not a standard maintenance hatch. The riveted frame indicated a secondary transit door. In the 1930s, major financial institutions built private sublevels, using these hidden arteries to move bullion discreetly between bank branches and armored trains. She had uncovered a forgotten node of the old financial district. 4 days of meticulous excavation exposed the entire locking mechanism. The door was a heavy-duty vault variant cast in solid iron, with rust having fused the outer hinges into a solid mass. The combination dial, however, remained pristine behind a sealed brass cover. Prying the cover off with a crowbar, Elena found that the dial spun smoothly on its internal bearings. There was no digital keypad to bypass and no electronic circuits to short. She faced a purely mechanical puzzle of brass tumblers and steel pins. Since brute force was entirely useless, cutting through the reinforced iron would require industrial thermite and weeks of loud labor. Elena chose an analytical approach. Accessing downloaded municipal archives through her offline portable terminal, she cross-referenced the station's exact construction dates with historical bank vault installations. The manufacturer shipped these specific transit units with standard factory combinations. Historical records showed a distinct pattern of human laziness. Most branch managers secured the main lobby vaults but ignored the subterranean transit doors, rarely bothering to change the secondary codes. Because the default sequences relied on the dates of the manufacturing company's founding and the patent numbers of the locking mechanisms, Elena compiled a list of the 12 most probable combinations. She began the first sequence. 4 complete turns to the left, stopping at the number 42, 3 turns to the right, landing on 16, 2 turns to the left, resting on 89, and 1 slow turn to the right to stop at 0. The dial clicked softly, but the internal tumblers did not drop. Resetting the dial by spinning it rapidly, she moved to the second sequence on her list. 3 turns left to 27, 2 turns right to 51, and 1 turn left to 14. Gripping the heavy steel handle and applying downward pressure, she heard a deep, metallic clunk echo through the empty tunnel as the massive internal locking bars retracted from their housings. Leaning her entire body weight against the lever, Elena forced the rusted hinges to scream in protest. As the heavy iron door swung outward, it exhaled a breath of incredibly dry, stagnant air. The interior chamber was perfectly preserved, its hermetic seal having protected its contents from the subway's constant humidity. Elena swept her flashlight beam into the darkness. There were no stacked bars of gold or canvas bags filled with currency. Instead, the steel shelves held something far more dangerous. Rows of thick, leather-bound ledgers lined the walls beside dozens of sealed lockboxes. Pulling the nearest ledger from the shelf, Elena opened it to find heavy parchment pages that were crisp, with black ink that remained sharp and unfaded. These were shadow accounting books from the mid-20th century, detailing the off-the-books transactions of the city's founding elite. Spreading the documents across her makeshift workbench, Elena began a systematic analysis of the financial data. The ledgers utilized a complex system of double-entry bookkeeping to hide massive capital flows. Tracing a series of payments logged under municipal infrastructure development, she realized the numbers did not match the historical public budgets. The ledgers proved a systematic theft of public funds spanning 3 decades, with money laundered through phantom construction companies. The very subway system she now occupied was built on a foundation of massive financial fraud, as contractors had systematically over-invoiced the city for steel and concrete. Opening a lockbox using a simple tension wrench, Elena found original property deeds, unrecorded stock certificates, and signed contracts inside. The names on these documents belonged to the patriarchs of the city's most powerful families, the same families who currently controlled the municipal council and the real estate boards. A specific contract caught her immediate attention, detailing the illegal transfer of land rights for the entire downtown commercial district. Because the current mayor's grandfather had signed the authorization, the documents proved the city's most prestigious real estate was acquired through violent extortion and bribery, forcing original owners to sign over their deeds under threat of ruin. Though the statute of limitations on the original crimes had long expired, the civil liability remained entirely valid. The unrecorded stock certificates represented untaxed generational wealth, and the property deeds proved the illegitimacy of the current zoning laws. This was not just a historical curiosity. It was a blueprint of systemic corruption that still dictated the city's power structure. Elena now held the leverage to dismantle the elite. The people who had orchestrated her recent financial ruin were direct descendants of these corrupt architects, having built their modern empires on stolen wealth. Carefully photographing every single page with her high-resolution digital scanner, she backed up the encrypted files to 3 separate solid-state drives. After meticulously returning the physical documents to their original places, Elena pushed the heavy iron door shut. Spinning the dial to lock the past away once more, she wiped the ancient dust from her hands. The information in her possession was a highly volatile weapon, and the next phase required absolute strategic precision. She needed to distribute this truth into the legal system without ever exposing her underground sanctuary. Bureaucracy is a blind, hungry predator that reacts exclusively to the scent of improper paperwork. Feed it the right anomalies, and it will inevitably devour its own masters. Elena understood this mechanism perfectly. The leather-bound ledgers extracted from the hidden vault were not mere historical artifacts. They were weaponized data. Sitting under the dim glow of her salvaged halogen lamps, the damp, cold air of the abandoned subway station contrasted sharply with the crisp, dry pages of the syndicate's secret archives. She spent 14 days decoding the handwritten financial entries, confirming that the organization, which had systematically erased her social and financial existence, possessed a long lineage. Their modern corporate empire was built upon decades of foundational fraud, and the vault held the original, unredacted blueprints of their corruption. She uncovered phantom shell companies registered in the 1970s, traced unreported offshore transfers cleverly masked as philanthropic donations, and found fraudulent land deeds used to acquire entire city blocks for pennies. Elena categorized every violation with surgical precision. Tax evasion went into the primary pile, corporate embezzlement formed the secondary stack, and municipal real estate fraud made up the third. She knew a direct, conventional approach would fail, as a single anonymous tip is easily intercepted by compromised officials, and a unified lawsuit filed by a ruined woman would be instantly crushed by their expensive legal teams. Instead, she designed a decentralized, self-sustaining legal trap aimed at an unstoppable chain reaction. Her strategy relied entirely on the concept of bureaucratic jealousy, because competing government agencies do not share information willingly, fighting fiercely for jurisdiction, media credit, and federal funding. Elena decided to exploit this inherent friction. She would make the State Departments trip over each other in a race to prosecute her enemies. Preparing 42 distinct, highly curated dossiers, she deliberately bypassed high-ranking directors and department heads, as those upper management positions were politically vulnerable and easily bribed. Instead, Elena targeted mid-level auditors and sought out ambitious investigators hungry for career advancement. These individuals were the relentless gears of the state machine, and they could not be stopped once set into motion. Since the distribution required perfect timing and absolute anonymity, she left the underground station only during the darkest hours of the night, utilizing postal drop boxes scattered across 20 different municipal zones. The glaring tax discrepancies went directly to the Federal Revenue Service. The forged historical land deeds were mailed to the City Zoning Commission, and the offshore routing numbers landed squarely on the desks of aggressive financial regulators. Elena staggered the deliveries to create maximum confusion, ensuring the Revenue Service received their package on a Monday, while the Zoning Commission got theirs on a Thursday. By embedding subtle cross-references in the margins of the copied documents, the federal tax auditor found a glaring hint about local real estate fraud, just as the municipal zoning clerk discovered undeniable evidence of federal tax evasion. This was the true genius of the trap. By cross-pollinating the evidence, she forced the agencies into a corner where they had to open joint inquiries. If one agency tried to quietly bury the file, the other would eventually expose their negligence. Ignoring the documents became a severe criminal offense for the clerks themselves, meaning the paper trail mandated immediate, aggressive action. The state machine woke up violently. Subpoenas were issued within 72 hours of the final delivery, prompting the municipal board to immediately freeze the syndicate's active construction assets. Meanwhile, the Revenue Service locked their primary domestic accounts pending a comprehensive forensic audit, and financial regulators suspended their corporate trading licenses. As panic set in above ground, the syndicate's crisis lawyers mobilized to intervene, only to slam into an impenetrable wall of red tape. You cannot bribe a legal process that spans 5 different jurisdictions simultaneously, and every attempt to suppress the local investigation only poured fuel on the federal inquiry until the trap closed rapidly from all sides. The state apparatus had effectively become Elena's pro bono legal team. Monitoring the surface world through a battery-powered radio and discarded financial newspapers, she noted that the results were swift and devastating. The syndicate's public stock value collapsed in a matter of days, and key board members resigned in a desperate attempt to avoid federal indictment. Authorities eventually seized the syndicate's towering downtown headquarters, leaving the very executives who had orchestrated Elena's exile facing total asset forfeiture. Trapped in a labyrinth of endless litigation, They could not fight the absolute and undeniable historical evidence. The paper archives had executed their purpose flawlessly, and the legal ground was now cleared for her triumphant return to the surface. As the legal avalanche triggered by the vault's archives reshaped the city's power structure, top executives faced federal indictments and municipal budgets froze under the weight of sudden audits. Desperately needing capital to plug the newly discovered financial craters, the city council began liquidating forgotten infrastructure, placing the sealed 1930s transit level on a closed municipal auction. Elena anticipated this move, establishing a blind trust registered under a neutral corporate entity. She had her legal team submit a preemptive cash offer. Eager to erase a problematic asset from the public ledger, city bureaucrats approved the sale in less than 48 hours, transitioning the subterranean space into private ownership. The exact concrete box that had served as her desperate refuge now became her exclusive domain. Because the transformation required a masterclass in adaptive reuse, Elena bypassed traditional architectural firms in favor of hiring industrial engineers and heritage conservationists. Their mandate was the strict preservation of historical decay, ensuring the raw aesthetic of the 1930s remained the focal point. Contractors began by stabilizing the structural integrity, injecting epoxy resins into the microfractures of the vaulted ceilings and installing heavy-duty steel beams to support the active street level above. The original emerald subway tiles were meticulously cleaned but deliberately left chipped, while the rust on the cast-iron pillars was chemically neutralized and sealed under clear matte lacquer. Systematically upgrading the makeshift survival systems, the improvised water filtration rig was replaced by a commercial-grade climate control matrix that regulated humidity to exact museum standards. The portable battery banks gave way to a dedicated subterranean power substation, with miles of copper wiring hidden behind suspended acoustic baffles that completely absorbed the vibrations from the adjacent active train lines. As the spatial geometry dictated the new layout, the main boarding platform evolved into a sprawling exhibition concourse where custom track lighting illuminated the raw concrete walls. Polished black basalt floors were poured over the cracked cement, creating a mirror effect that reflected the arched ceilings and doubled the perceived volume of the space. The hidden bank vault underwent the most radical shift. Engineers removed the locking mechanisms, but kept the massive steel door permanently wedged open, transforming the interior into a climate-sealed sanctuary for high-value installations that was now secured by biometric scanners rather than old mechanical combination locks. Above ground, the entrance required absolute discretion. Elena purchased a derelict newspaper kiosk on the street level, gutting and retrofitting the structure with a high-speed hydraulic elevator. Taking exactly 22 seconds, the descent transported visitors from the noisy pavement directly into the silent, cavernous lobby. The grand opening was a masterstroke of social engineering. Curating the guest list with surgical precision, Elena invited the very investors and board members who had orchestrated her initial downfall, sending them matte black metal invitation cards. None of them knew the true identity of the venue's owner. Descending into the earth in designer suits and evening gowns, the city's elite marveled at the brutalist architecture. Waiters carried trays of vintage champagne across the exact spot where Elena had once slept on cardboard, and string quartets played in the corners where she had mapped out her survival strategy, creating an irony that was palpable yet entirely invisible to the guests. The venue instantly dominated the cultural landscape as art critics declared it a triumph of urban reclamation, and international galleries fought for exhibition slots. Hosting avant-garde fashion shows and exclusive charity galas, revenue flowed rapidly through premium ticket sales, private event leases, and corporate sponsorships. With a strict membership tier system implemented, the waitlist stretched for 18 months as the city's wealthiest citizens paid exorbitant annual fees just to secure access to the subterranean lounge. Ultimately, the underground station generated more capital in 1 quarter than the entire block above it did in a year. Elena managed the entire operation from a glass-enclosed office suspended above the main platform in the former signal control room. Tinted windows allowed her to observe the crowds without being seen, giving her the perfect vantage point to watch the city's elite navigate her former prison. She had weaponized her exile. While the financial archives had restored her wealth, the station secured her legacy. She did not just return to the society that expelled her. She built a new cultural epicenter beneath their feet and forced them to descend on her terms. Elena's story teaches us a profound truth about the systems designed to keep us down. Rock bottom isn't a graveyard. It's a solid, concrete foundation. She didn't just survive her exile, she weaponized it. She took the absolute worst conditions imaginable and used her intellect, patience, and the arrogance of her enemies to engineer a flawless trap. She proves that true power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from the ability to adapt in the dark. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute breaking point by a rigged system? Have you ever been betrayed only to discover a hidden strength you didn't know you possessed? Tell us your story in the comments below. Someone watching right now might need your inspiration to keep fighting today. If Elena's masterclass in resilience and poetic justice moved you, please subscribe to While You Still Can and turn on those notifications. We bring you powerful stories of people who refuse to be victims and choose to become architects of their own fate. Like and share this video with anyone who needs to remember that losing everything is just the first step to gaining it all back. Remember, the system only controls you if you play by its rules. Step into the shadows, build your strength, and take back your power while you still can.